you today?
I'm super fine, I would say.
Oh,
That's amazing. You're signing in from Italy. We're so glad that you've come to join us on our wine series that we have today, where we're going to be rolling out a series for beginners, for intermediate, and for advanced. And we met you, I guess it's 3 years ago now, the original time.
Yeah, it's 3 years ago. 3 years ago.
In Italy. And you have a wonderful winery, and you have a wonderful story and wonderful knowledge. And wonderful is my word for today.
Well, I can stick with that. I'm really, really happy. You two are wonderful, so it's just perfect.
Thank you.
What a wonderful color you have on today.
Oh, thank you. Isn't everything wonderful? Here we are. Here we are in the Corona pandemic world and life, and we're talking about everything being wonderful.
Yeah, and having some wine.
Yeah, we've got some wine here that we're drinking, so possibly that's why we're extra wonderful.
That's the perfect way. That's the way to do it. So.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And, you know, there's so much around you and so much knowledge that you have that we want to share with everybody, and why we've asked you to be on today with our wine series. It's important as if for a food lover that's a beginner or an intermediate or an advanced to be able to know. We met you at your winery, which is an organic winery.
Yeah.
Podere di Pomaio.
Super.
Podere di Pomaio.
That's perfect. That's really perfect.
And it is a wonderful, wonderful spot. Should I say wonderful one more time?
It's breathtaking.
If you want to, I'll be really happy. I appreciate compliments, so don't worry.
No, when we did our tour 3 years ago, we were very impressed with the winery, that it is organic and how you run the winery, the seminars that you hold there, and most of all, the product. When we did the wine tasting to the food pairing, we were just blown away. And hence why we had our pictures done at your place. We have done so many things with you, and the knowledge that you have and the product that you have is incredible. But you are a wine teller and sommelier. You're, of course, the founder, the co-founder of the winery, Dario.it. And we'll put all that into the link as well so people can resource to it.
Super.
You also have a television show. You're a TV host, which is incredible.
Yes.
So wine-tv.it?
Yeah, well, actually, it's a Sky television, so it's on satellite. Okay, so it's a national television, and it's a quite boring TV channel because we talk about wine all day. So either you really like wine.
Nothing boring about that.
Yeah, so either you really love wine, otherwise you get bored after 5 minutes. But
is it Italian or English?
It's in Italian, but we're working on creating subtitles. So from 2021, probably every single episode of every single TV show will be having subtitles. Yes, we're not dubbing, but we're using subtitles.
Oh, that's wonderful. Great. So you also are an international lecturer. That's wonderful to hear as well.
Yes, I spent quite a lot of time in South Korea so far. Family is not too happy about it, but hey, it's my job, so there's nothing I can do with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess now some of that might be online, possibly, right?
Yeah, well, actually, I was in South Korea when the pandemic started. I was there on the 31st of January. And I came back from South Korea on the 21st of February because it was my daughter's second birthday. But I went straight to quarantine, so I didn't have the chance to pass time with my daughter. So I missed her birthday. Yeah.
But then during quarantine, your wife and you had to be separated with your daughter as well, right?
We kind of like switched roles. So as soon as I got out of the quarantine, it was the 6th or 7th of March, and Italy went on lockdown on the 8th, so like the day after. And as my wife, she works in a hospital, we couldn't spend time together. So we were actually separated and we were living in 2 different houses. I was with my daughter and my wife's parents, and she was by herself. At least I hope she was by herself.
But you know what? The most incredible thing, what a great relationship with the in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's super.
Not many people can say that. I can, because I'm very fortunate with Anita's family. A lot of people say, oh my God, I don't want to be with their in-laws. I must be.
I had super fun, but basically, I'm quite frustrated because we played table tennis quite a lot and I never won. So that's a quarantine story to tell in the future, but now I don't want to talk about it.
So your 2-year-old daughter beat you?
No, my father-in-law, but probably even my 2 years daughter would be able to beat me. So I really suck, but hey, on the other hand, every night I brought a bottle of wine that we tasted together. So
that's awesome. Awesome.
So I don't know how many days of quarantine, but each day a different wine. So
wow,
now my wife's families, they are actually pro. They know everything about wine.
Good.
That's great. So anyway, I also noticed here that you have this wine marketing consultant with this Untrending. What is that about?
Well, when we started the winery, the project with Podere di Pomaio, we realized that it's quite easy for small wineries to struggle on the market to design authentic, not corporate marketing strategy. Because, whenever you bring marketing in, the final output might be that you become a little bit too corporate minded. On the other hand, you still do need to have a bit of guidance. So you still need to have a bit of marketing strategy. Then at that point, I met so many winemakers that were struggling like us. And I was able, with a couple of friends, to design simple ways to help them out and to help them access international markets and to help them basically to tell their story. So it's nothing too complex, really simple marketing funnel that's based on really authenticity. The worst thing you can do is try to force a winemaker not to be himself. Yeah. That's the worst thing you can do.
That's so true.
So we try to come up with a fair way to approach the market and to tell their story. That's it. Really simple.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I looked briefly on the site, but I was trying to get a little bit more of an idea of what that was. So that's great. So just so the listeners know, I mean, I'm assuming they know who we are at this point, but we've structured this as Marco being the expert, Dario being sort of the intermediate, and me being sort of the beginner of wine expertise. And I think it's important that people know that. So of course, we're going to direct the questions to Marco, and Dario, of course, will have some input being a chef and being able to add to that. And I might add some things that are experiences to mine to ask a question. So we'll roll out for the beginner segment of this. And at the end of the intermediate, we're going to offer your testing sheet, which I'm excited to work with, which I think is really neat because your testing sheet, people can actually use as a book. So every time they go through and they order some wine or they bring some wine in, they can go through themselves and then make a little booklet out of it.
Yes. That's I think that that's a great way to put it. And when you start tasting wine, you taste so much wine that you're gonna lose track of it. It's impossible to remember everything. So if you're able to write down just a few details, starting of course from the name of the wine and the vintage, and then you just go with characteristics, then you can compare same wine, different vintage. You can compare same grape variety, but different areas and so on. So it becomes really, really fun.
One thing I want to say about Marco, which is very impressive to me and to many people, I think, to us actually, is the philosophy. Is the family philosophy. Is you and your brother Jacopo, and is the atmosphere when you walk into, first of all, Podere di Pomaio, because it's right out of a book now, or out of a movie. The experience, I mean, I have goosebumps just talking about it.
It is incredible.
But it's a journey. It's an experience of an adventure of culture, learning lesson, wine, and understanding the typology of the environment you're living in, which I found for me been breathtaking. And I encourage all our listeners to then, we need to go see Podere di Pomaio. We know we're going to bring some people there to Podere di Pomaio because it's our go-to spot. But the philosophy of yourself and Jacopo around Podere di Pomaio, it's the most fascinating part.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, you know, I believe that wine is actually a message in a bottle, you know, so it's easy to tell it's in a bottle, but it carries a message out, which is a message that has to deal with the history and tradition of the place, with the choices made by the people that are actually making the wine. And also it's telling about the vintage, because of course a sunny vintage will give wines that are more generous, a sunny area will make more generous wine, and so on. So you can understand really a lot from a single bottle of wine.
Absolutely.
I love that message in a bottle, because we've actually used that line for our business too, that we have a message in a bottle. So I'm like, wow.
I think it's brilliant. You know, the way you put it, it's even better, because there is something there, and each bottle is different. Each bottle's got a different message.
Yeah.
Love it. I love it.
Great. Okay, so we'll run into some of the questions here, unless you have anything to say or ask or anything.
Nope, I'm ready.
Good. Okay, what, you know, a lot of people are going to ask, and I know a lot of people have asked before, what is the importance of a wine sommelier?
Well, it's a bit complicated. What I mean is that wine sommelier is really important, but at the same time, it's not fundamental. What I mean is that if we're talking about a restaurant, but even just a tasting experience or a visit in a winery, the sommelier is not actually the star. Okay, so he gets all the attention maybe because he's carrying out the talking and so on, and he's but he's just a media. So his role is basically to embrace the knowledge of wine and make that knowledge easy to access for normal people who might not even have that much time to focus on the actual message. So it's a bit complicated, and sometimes you need to remember yourself when you're a sommelier that you need to keep humble, and again that you're not the star. You're just telling the story that someone else wrote, and using a lot of effort, energy, money, stress, and so on. So it's a really important role, especially for that, because you need to fight with yourself as well.
I find it is a very important role, because there's so much to wine that the training that a sommelier has to be able to, like you said, relate that to the average person is important. Because if you don't know what you don't know, right?
Well, consider.
Sorry, go ahead, Marco.
No, consider if we talk about Italy, for example, you have 20 regions. 20 regions, each region makes wine, and you have around over 2,000 grape varieties. And then you have over 330 DOC, and then you have almost 80 DOCG. So it's really hard to navigate yourself around. And a sommelier should actually be the kind of person that brings you around, okay, without getting in the way. Okay, that's really, really important. So it's kind of like, the Japanese concept of flowing. We need to help people to flow in the wine world. That's it. But the wine world exists even if we're not there.
Yeah.
I think it's a very important factor, because the sommelier, it's as a chef, I always found that a very important part of the culinary aspect. Okay, I think there needs to be a lot of synchrony. I'm talking about restaurant now, between the sommelier and the chef. Yes. And to a point, and I don't know if we talked even in the past, I actually thought, because the concept is you design a menu and then the sommelier pair the wine. And a few years ago, I decided to do reverse. The sommelier picks the wine and then we pair the meal. Because it's easier to change a profile of a meal than the profile of a wine.
Yes, right? Definitely.
So once you open that wine, the sounds, the notes are that one. You can change the spice. You can change anything, the ingredients you might put on that dish. So I think it's such an important part, and I think they are both important in many ways. Yeah. I found it fascinating to me, because I learned so much more about food by listening from a sommelier, because the sommelier has got a much more refined palate.
Yeah, well, it happens a lot of times that I find myself talking with chefs about flavor and so on. And sometimes they were like, yeah, well, you know, I've never seen the plate from that exact point of view. I know we know exactly, of course, what brings acidity and so on, but then, you know, that's what we focus on. And basically, it's playing around with all the feelings, the sensations. So that's how we practice all the time. While, of course, for the chef, maybe tasting is just proving that he did the right thing. But it's not a matter of every time you taste it to keep focusing and training on the taste. And well, for us, it's the main focus.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think of the right thing to do as far as the wine and food pairing, but there's also, and maybe I'll ask this in a later question, but there's also the individual preference too, right? So yeah. I'm going to ask that later in probably the intermediate or advanced questions in the other segment, but there's so much we could talk about with this, right?
It's endless.
Yeah. What's the history of your wine and the winery? I love the story behind this, so I had to ask that question so the listeners could hear it.
Well, you know, basically our father in 1991, he was walking around the mountain, around the hill of Pomaio, which actually is called Poti. So Pomaio is just an area of the mountain, and he felt kind of like a certain type of vibe, and he decided to enter this property, which was abandoned since Second World War because it was really close to the enemy line. So you had all the bombings in the area, and it was too dangerous to keep living there. So all the farmers moved out, and after Second World War, no one really wanted to go back to farming. Everyone wanted to work in an office or in a factory. So he felt a good energy, good vibes, and decided to buy the place. And he bought it for the family. We're a really large family, big family. Our father got married 3 times. My mother got married 3 times. So you can imagine a lot of brothers and so on. So our father wanted us to have a place, basically, that every single member of the family could call home. And that's why he bought Pomaio. Then in 2001, Jacopo graduated in college, agricultural science, got a master's degree in vines growing, and decided to restart the farm project of Podere di Pomaio. So we actually restarted in 2001, but we had to reimplant the vineyards and everything. Got the organic certification in 2001 on the first day. So it was not for the trend, because at that time organic was not so trendy. And we were already talking about sustainability, which was not trendy at all in the late 90s. So that's basically in our DNA. And finally, 2004, we were able to implant the vineyards. 2009, first tryout. 2010, first official vintage. So we actually made wine for the first time.
Oh, great.
It was a long journey. Really
so 10 years
journey.
now.
Yeah. 10 years.
Yeah.
Quite fascinating when you're thinking about people. You know, you made a really good point when you talk about, you know, sustainable, organic, that now everybody uses almost like a fashion statement. I say it.
Yeah.
You guys really lived it, believed it, and really took a chance on it. I mean, it's part of the culture of Italian culture, Toscan culture, especially the area where you are, but really follow through it and really proves on the wine. Wow.
That's great. I love that story.
Yeah, it's
really nice. Nice tight-knit family you are as well. So yeah. So as a beginner, I mean, we're in the beginner stage of things. You know, a lot of people don't understand the reasoning for wine and how it enhances a meal. We do in our International Dinner Club, we do wine pairing, but we also do juice pairing. I don't know if we've ever told you that.
No, but that's a great thing.
So when as a child, my mom used to juice for our family every evening. So that it would usually be a carrot and a parsley, and it was for health reasons, and we had to drink it before we had our meal. And so Dario came up with the idea, you know, why not do it as a pairing? Because some people, they can't necessarily have wine. So we always offer a wine pairing because we love our wine, but we also offer a food pairing for it as well. But a lot of people don't understand, you know, how it actually enhances a meal. So I'd love to hear your explanation on, you know, how wine enhances.
Well, you know, let's say that there are different points of view. I mean, you can see the same thing from different points of view. If you want to make the plate stand out, if you want the wine to stand out, so it depends on what your final goal is. But it's quite simple. Basically, when you're doing the food pairing, food and wine pairing, what you're trying to do is to balance. Okay, so you're gonna go for the opposites. If you have a greasy food, you're gonna use something that's a wine that's quite mineral and salty. It's gonna clean your palate. Okay, acidity helps you to clean the palate as well, like also sparkling wine. Of course, tannins in the wine might bring a little bit of bitterness. So if you're using like artichokes or you using other ingredients that are already slightly bitter, you're not going to use a wine that has strong tannins, because otherwise you're just going to amplify the bitterness of the plate, and it's going to be a bit metallic at the palate. It's not going to be really a pleasant experience. So what you're trying to do is really to balance that. There is only one thing that goes together, which is basically the flavor. So you see, if it's a flavory dish, you need a flavory wine. Okay, because otherwise the dish will just go over the wine, and you're not going to really feel the wine. But for the rest, you're just going for the opposites in order to be able to balance. And you want to have a clean palate at the end. That's the main thing.
When you say flavory, is that what you mean by full body?
No, there are two different things. You might have a wine that's not full body, but it's really flavory. So you have a really nice taste, and it stays in your palate. Of course, if you're talking like about spices, you need body and structure to balance spices, okay? Because then it's not just flavor, but it's overpowering the flavor. So you do need muscles to be able to confront that.
And that's quite interesting because, for example, we are talking briefly about, the Tuscan cuisine. From where you guys are from, then it's very complex in one way, very simple, very pure, but very complex. So when you have a lot of, bread, for example, has no salt, but everything else compensate.
Yes.
The spiciness maybe on a charcuterie, the little bit more peppery, so there is a little more fennel infusion. So how do you find matching the flavors with your wines and working with that?
Well, consider there is also another way of pairing, right? Which is using tradition. Of course, back in the days, wine consumption was based on being local. Okay, so you had to deal with the wines you had. For example, Tuscan prosciutto with Tuscan Sangiovese is not really a good pairing, because you have strong tannins, and then you have the saltiness, and you might get a kind of like a metallic taste at the palate, right? But the tradition goes that way, so we can't say no, you should not do it. For the rest, it's really a matter of trying, experience, taste, understand. But of course, there are some grape varieties who tend to have some characteristics. Some different areas who tend to make wines with some specific characteristics. So with that ready, you're able to have a first guideline. Then you need to consider the vintage, because every year is different if you make wine respecting nature, the natural life cycle. So one vintage might be good in the pairing, another one might not be good of the same wine. And then the style of the producer. So there are many things you need to consider. But usually, for example, Chianti goes really well with T-bone steak, okay? And the reason is that the tannins dry a little bit your palate, okay? When you chew a T-bone steak in Tuscany, you never cook it too much, okay? So it's not even medium rare. It's
we did the same.
Okay. So when you eat it, you chew and you add saliva to your palate, and at the same time you get the liquids out of the meat. So you have a lot of liquids in your palate, and you need to dry them. So to dry them, you need tannins, you need the alcohol level, and a Chianti wine, which is mainly Sangiovese, tends to have quite a lot of tannins and to have a good alcohol level. So it's just a perfect pairing.
And that would be for all red meat, right? Not just the T-bone?
Well, let's say that red wine goes better with red meat, for sure, okay? But then depending on the kind of meat, for example, I don't know, let's say wine from Bulgaria, from the coast, okay, which is not made with Sangiovese, but it's Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, international varieties. Usually it's larger, bigger, more body, more structure. And if you're eating like a T-bone steak, you might go over it. Okay, so maybe you want to eat something that's like roasted, for example. Okay, so, but in an easy way, meat with red wine. Okay, fish with white wine. Okay, rosé, depending how it's made, it stands a little bit in the middle, but it's not able really to go to the fringe. Okay, but again, there are a lot of exceptions. Consider there is a red wine in the north of Italy, in Alto Adige, South Tyrol, which has it's red but has no tannins. Tannins are only in red wines, not in white, but has no tannins. So you can chill it a little bit, and then you can pair it with fish, for example. So there are a lot of exceptions.
That's probably the experience I want to talk about in the next in the next video that I went through.
Well,
that
you
was
guys are
similar
talking
to
about
that.
have some wine. Cheers.
So I guess the biggest thing is, you know, if you're a beginner, to not rush out right away and get Chianti, but it's good to get it, and that's a good place to start, right? Is to try some wines and really get the sheet and work through it and to really understand what it is for a beginner until you try it, until you experience it, to really know what it's like.
Well, you know, every journey starts with a step, we say, right? Yeah. So the best thing is to just throw yourself in the middle, start tasting, understanding what you like, what you don't like. You know, you drink 3 different Chiantis and you understand that you don't like Sangiovese because it has a high acidity, for example. And usually at the beginning, you don't like acidity. You tend to like something that's more round, soft, maybe a Merlot or a Cabernet, for example, that's rounder, softer. And usually it's aged in a small French oak barrique, which makes the wine slightly sweeter. And usually when you start with that type of wine. But slowly you go for something that's quite different. And then you go to the opposite. And then after some years, you kind of like balance. Yeah. And you're able to pick from both worlds. No? So that's really important.
So how do you know what a good quality wine is? If you were to go into, I mean, for us, we have to go into the liquor store really to get a wine. No, we do. We are able to go and get our Ontario wines in the grocery store now. But let's say we're in North America or wherever, and we're looking at, well, how do you know what a good quality wine is? Is there a way of being able to tell on the bottle? Is it ratings a certain way, or how does it?
That's actually a very tricky question.
You know, you walk in and you're like, oh, I want a wine. Well, maybe I'll try Italian today. What do you look for? Is there anything on the bottle that can tell you?
Well, it's really tough to tell by the bottle.
Good question.
And on every market, then it's different because maybe there are different regulation and requirements about the information you get on the bottle. So even that's not really easy to use. You know, for example, in the English-speaking world, usually you have on-trade, off-trade, right? How you buy wine. In Italy, it's divided in Horeca, so restaurants, basically, hotels and so on, and grocery stores, okay? So, and the market is divided half and half. If you see the barcode on the label of the wine in Italy, you know that probably that wine goes on grocery stores, okay? So it's a bit more mass product. If it doesn't have it, it's meant and designed for restaurants, which means that it's not 100% sure, of course, but which means that probably the producer took care of making wine in a different way with a bit more identity because it doesn't need to respond to a larger market. And also because in a restaurant, you have one person, maybe the sommelier or the waiter or the restaurant owner, coming to the table and explaining the wine. While in the grocery store, the consumer is left by himself in front of a shelf, right? So you need to meet kind of like some standards and requirements on taste that every vintage has to be slightly the same because the promise you're giving to the consumer is different from the promise you're giving to the consumer in a restaurant. So I'm not saying good or bad, but it's different.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's for example a way in Italy that's really easy to position the wine. But then the wine goes abroad, and maybe there are countries that require the barcode on every single bottle. So that doesn't work anymore. And then wine is sold in different ways. So that doesn't work anymore at all. So the best thing is to taste. Okay. Of course, whenever you read behind and you see there is a lot of marketing, then you know that there is probably a big company behind with a lot of marketing analysis and so on, which doesn't mean that the wine is not good, but maybe it lacks a little bit of identity. And what I like in wine is identity, because the wine is telling me a story. It's telling me the idea of someone. It's telling me the history of a territory, and I want to hear that. Then maybe I don't like it that much, but at least I'm interested.
Yeah. No, I find before I started getting into the wine sort of learning, I always went by what the label looked like. If I like the label or the name, I go, oh, that's got to be fun. That's got to be a good one.
The name of the label.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that within Canada, we have a vintage section. And the vintage section I've gone to, and I've spent a large amount of money for a bottle of wine that was not very good. Is there a way to look online to be able to get ratings of wines out there?
Well, there are many apps, but for example, there are some apps that are community-based, which at the end becomes kind of like a restaurant rating app. I'm not gonna say the name, but you know, you work in the world of chefs and restaurants, and you know how frustrating sometimes it is to see that there are restaurants that everyone knows in the business that they're not really providing quality, but the consumer for some reason feels that that's real quality, and it will reward it. Same thing with the wine. So it becomes really, really difficult. But the best way is to set your taste, to read as much as you can on wine, then to go to tastings. Talk to the producers, talk to the importers, talk to the sommeliers, and then you start learning. You get inputs, you're gonna use them, you're gonna start learning. So you need to go on the field.
I think so. You know, you made a really good point. By the way, I just learned a new one about the two different sizes in Italy. Then you know, then a label goes to a restaurant and that one goes to the market. That's a thank you for sharing, because it was it was a new thing, but it makes total sense. Yeah. You know, it's funny because you know what you're saying is right on point, because to know wine, you need to know the people who make it.
Yes.
Okay. So I often find, and when we travel, and whenever the best way do you know a wine is to really go to the guy who actually made it and really can tell you a story. And he's all about a story. Everything is about a story. Because if you sometimes go by the big name, or a name that you know is well recognized per se, sometimes you get disappointed, because you know we talk about palate. You know, our palate is as an individual palate, and you know we might not perceive it the same way. And I find that you know we go to places sometimes you don't expect. You go into this little winery, you know, even here in Ontario, or last year, for example, when we drove on the Okanagan Valley, these little gems, and you found some phenomenal wine that you would never thought. You probably would have never seen on a shelf. But by learning from the guy who makes it, you say, wow.
You know, that's why your story is so phenomenal.
Yes.
I'm going to visit you, and I can't wait till we can travel again and come back.
You know, Veronelli used to say that you need to walk the vineyards in order to really appreciate the wine.
And we walked your vineyards.
So we know. Anyway, we're getting to the last question here, and then I guess we'll go into the intermediate after, and then offer the tasting sheet that we were talking about. But you know, you decided to go organic with your wine. So why is that?
Well, first of all, it's way more respectful for the environment, and I really think that our goal, our aim, but not as Marco and Jacopo, but as human beings, it's to pass on the land that we don't really own. I mean, it's we own it for a small amount of time, because of course our life is really short compared to the life of the world. So, but for that period, our duty is to improve it. Okay, that's why we always say that we're improving the world one bottle at a time, because our aim is basically to improve that and to pass it on to the future generation, improved compared to the way that we received it. And at the same time, it's really important that we pass on kind of like of approach and philosophy. And you can do that if you're organic. If you're not organic, it becomes really, really hard to be able to do that. So plus, we want to respect people that take their time to drink our wines. So we want to keep them healthy, in shape. We don't want them to get sick or to get a headache. So we want them to be able to drink 2 bottles instead of 1, which is also good for business. You know, so, and also flavor-wise, an organic wine has less filters. So you're really tasting that world, the world of Pomaio in this case, but it can be the world of any other wine producer. Well, if I'm conventional, I can put up so much makeup on the wine that you don't really know what you're getting. You might wake up the next morning and you're gonna.
I knew that was coming.
Who are you?
I knew that was coming. You don't want it to be, as they call it, a coyote ugly wine.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, you know, it's fascinating when you talk about makeup, camouflaging, anything. Okay,
yeah,
and keeping a purity of a product takes away all the other impurity that you're actually going to be in your brain or in your head the next morning. Okay,
yeah.
It's really keeping it good, clean, and proper. So,
Yes.
and really rediscover. I think the fascination about, for people understanding, and I think, you know, when we're going to go into the next stages, we can kind of elaborate a little bit more, is organic. The way you guys are doing it is not just because you want to be called organic. It's because it's a way of living, is a way of respect, is a way of sharing. It is a way to represent where you are, where you believe. And if you want to represent that type of persona, you always will be consistent, you know.
You gotta live it, yeah.
And you have to live it. You have to live
it.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I guess in number 2, we'll get into some more questions that are deeper dives into sommelier life and wine and meal pairing and the rest of it. So thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.